All right, we are recording. First topic is Prometheus agent cannot run with Prometheus CRD without patching containers arguments.
Now let's start with a different topic. First topic is that we have a new maintainer. Hello, Philip, and welcome on board as a maintainer for Kube-prometheus.
That's true. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on board.
Okay, let's go with the agenda. So I think the first topic is what I wrote, which is that the Prometheus agent cannot actually run with Prometheus CRD without patching container arguments. So we need to do strategic merge patch for containers if we want to run Prometheus agent with existing Prometheus CRD, which is kind of something that we should probably not advertise to our users, but this is the way of running Prometheus agent, which at least for me kind of puts the Prometheus agent CRD on fast track. I don't know if you agree with that. What are your opinions on this?
So
yeah. Go ahead, Son.
Yeah, for me, when I tested it, that's how I made it run, and it was kind of just for the reasons that Arthur listed, is that the flags are not the same. So anyway, we have no other solution today. I agree that this single case makes a strong argument for having going faster with the Prometheus agent CRD. At the same time, we need to start by having some design document so that we can not rush anything, I guess. But yeah, sure. We have some interest, and Philip, since you joined, in making that possible in this rather short future. So we'll try to dedicate some time on this next year for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but more or less just what Simon says. I mean, it feels like a bit of a hacky workaround just to get it working, right? So it seems like a less than ideal solution that we have right now. And I agree that obviously fast tracking the CRD then is probably the only alternative realistic approach, isn't it?
Yeah, because we need to have a different logic in Prometheus Operator of handling that, and the different logic can be either via CRD, which we agreed upon, or having a switch in Prometheus CRD, but I really don't like the second approach. So what do we do with Kube-prometheus right now and the PR of enabling that Prometheus agent? Do you want to merge that with the approach of strategic merge patch for containers, or just leave it as is, put a WIP on it, but it's a draft, and that's not something that we recommend.
I think even if we were to merge it, that's probably something we would want to do, right? Say this is likely going to be removed in the very near future. And then hope that no one goes to depend on that or wants to keep it. Just call it out explicitly that it will be removed in future releases.
I remember in the last meeting we agreed that if we did that with Prometheus, we would also add passes and everything. Maybe just remove some effort and do as Philip said, like merge and then add a notice that we'll remove some.
Yeah, but soon for Kube-prometheus is half a year or even more, because releases are very tied to a different release cadence, not Prometheus Operator release cadence. Plus, if we do a release, this is tied to Kubernetes versions, like Kubernetes support matrix, which means that this will be present for a long time. people are still using release 0.8 when we are close to release 0.10. So if we put that into the repository, I fear that we will need to support that for another year or so. That's quite a long time.
So I'm not a Kube-prometheus maintainer, but is that what we said last meeting was that people may want to try it, but there would be like power users that probably would be okay to just maintain their own JSON-net batch, just to enable that. I think I get your concern, Pavel, that if we put that in the repository, then people will just use it. I don't think we've got anything like contrib or things that are marked as this is something we provide, but we may remove it at any point in time, or that's not really part of the contract of the thing that we deliver.
No, we don't have anything like that in the repository. However, we can start. I think that if we want to merge that, we can put a document and put into that document a huge red note that this is experimental. We are not supporting this.
And to me, the patch, I mean, is quite limited. No, or you can quite easily just take the Prometheus JSON-net lib and then apply a few overrides, and then you've got a running Prometheus agent. So if you keep that, like, not, like you said, not having something blessed by the project, but something, if you want to do it, then just put that in your JSON-net repo of your own, and then that will do the job.
That sounds good for me. Any other opinions?
Sounds okay to me too. Maybe we might learn something about the agent while we do that as well before fleshing out the CRD. There might be some benefits to it.
Yep, that's true. Okay, since the PR is contributed by me and Arthur, I think we both will take it to finish line.
Yep.
Okay, next agenda item, Damien. Want to take over?
Yeah, I just wanted to to mention some update regarding the team. So first, yeah, welcome Philip, and it's great to have you in the Kube-prometheus team. And the other topic was that I was going to step down from my Kube-prometheus maintainer role since I don't have enough time to dedicate to the project anymore. But yeah, it's awesome that now we have Philip that is really involved in the project and can continue to lead it from the Red Hat perspective. So it's nice.
Yeah, thank you, Damon, for all the work that you did with the project. And I hope we will meet again with other projects in Kubernetes environment.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will surely happen. Right, I guess we can go to the next one. So Simon.
Yeah, that's something we discussed, in fact, internally, because we are planning on rolling out what we call user alerting. So basically the capability for users to define their own alert manager config using the alert manager config CRD. And something that we want to happen is to deploy a validating webhook for the alert manager config custom resources, because they are not like, we know that they can't be only validated by the open API specs. Yeah, there are definitely challenges doing that. Right now, the validating webhook endpoint is implemented by the Prometheus operator. You can only run one of them. So yeah, the idea is that if we could deploy, so the use case is that to overcome that limitation, then we want to be able to deploy several instances of the validating webhook endpoint, so that even if you upgrade a node and you need to roll out the validating Webhook pod or the Prometheus Operator pod to another node, then you don't have a period of time where the Webhook is unavailable, and then users can't modify or create alert manager configs. So pretty simple. Now on the implementation level, I had imagined two options. One of them is to separate the validating Webhook endpoint into a separate binary, so something that you could deploy optionally. With right now, the fact that the operator is running the validating Webhook is kind of, okay, it was made that way, but there is no reason why it should be that way. It's pretty an independent functionality from the rest of the operator. And the other option would be to have a way to deploy two instances, two replicas of the Prometheus operator, but then we need to somehow deal with leader election, stuff like that. Or something that probably would, so what Pavel commented that he was more keen on pushing the first option, that we have a separate binary, which looking at the code should be pretty easy to do anyway. And we can even like keep the option of having the validating service being available in the Prometheus operator, and just have for people that don't want to change anything to the current deployment, and then have the second binary available too.
Yeah, and when having this and having like the separate binary, I was also looking at the at this from the Kube-Prometheus perspective, because right now a lot of users are not using validation webhooks. OpenShift is one of the examples where they are actually used, but majority of deployments are not using this, and we do see issues that people are catching things like incorrect rules or anything like that, which could be prevented by using validation webhook. And from Kube-Prometheus perspective, it would be much easier to have this as a single switch that, hey, this is, you want to have validation webhooks, put this binary here and enable all the objects that you want to have. This is kind of similar how Cert Manager does it. They also have a separate binary that handles webhook and handles all the validation. And additionally to that, when we have a webhook and we need to have a validation action performed, we need to have the safe connection to, like encrypted connection to API server, which means that we need certificates. And with a single binary, I think that it will be easier to put that, that logic into the binary itself and model possibly after other solutions. Whereas with Prometheus Operator, if we put that into the whole high availability mode and two Prometheus operators, that's kind of a lot of code putting into the operator that can be used in a different way. And yeah. Basically, I'm for separate binary.
Yeah, I didn't know about the Cert Manager, so that's a good, I would say, a good data point. To me, it seems more logical to have a separate binary, because really, if you look at the code in the main.go of the operator, like it should be easy to extract the part that is managing the HTTP communication from the API server. We can probably, yeah, simplify stuff even. And I agree that, yeah, if we can get to a stage where in Kube-Prometheus you have the option to just pull one library that would, okay, you just got everything configured for you, validating. Right now we are only validating rules and alert manager configs, but I think we should also validate service monitors. There are stuff that we don't validate right now that would, so that would make your service monitor, for instance, being rejected by the operator. So right now, you have created a service monitor, but then after that, the operator will detect that your configuration is invalid, and so it will be rejected. Like in reliable configs, for instance, there are certain combinations that you can't, that are not correct. So stuff like that.
Yeah, I was even going with enabling those by default in Kube-Prometheus when we have that ready, because that way much more people will use it. And since Kube-Prometheus is all about having a secure and best practice deployment for Prometheus Operator and the monitoring stack, that seems like something that we should probably include by default.
Yeah, just commenting on the validation of Service Monitor. I don't know if you saw, but recently, I think in 1.23, there will be a new feature that was added to kind of the CRD validation, which basically they are bringing a new language that will be used during validation. So you can basically write scripts to validate fields or values, whatever you need, basically. And that will be available in 1.23, and I think it should cover plenty of use case that we have in Prometheus Operator, besides like the Prometheus rules use case where you need to validate the query. The language itself won't know whether the query is valid or not, so that might still require admission webhook. But we can maybe like keep the validation webhook for Prometheus rules or anything that really needs PromQL validation, and for all the other use case, then we can keep that inside of the CRD itself.
I mean, can you share some examples in the agenda document?
Sure.
In the notes, if you have anything
Let
going around.
Let me share the cap just in the call. As for the example, I might need to go through the cap again.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I think the more we can offload to the API server, the better. Yeah. What we discussed with Philip is that if we take a few months back, then we didn't put very detailed validations in the CRD definitions. Philip has done a great work at adding more of them, especially on the alert manager config CRD. Like we realized that there are stuff that we can't validate with Open API, but the more we can at least make be performed by the Open API spec, the better, because then we can remove some code from the operator itself. Don't need to validate stuff more than what only need to take care of things that can't be validated right now. So if there is a possibility for even improving the validation at the CRD definition, then that's fine. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely having a dedicated binary for that will work way better than just putting that into Prometheus Operator. I'm not sure if I have like examples, but I have user stories, so that might help. I think in the PR there are a couple of tests that shows exactly the syntax and stuff like that, but it's like a 1,000 more line file, so it might be annoying to go through. But maybe there will be a document. I don't know.
At one point, we can also. I mean, I would maybe wait for things like controller gen to add markers for such for these options before we actually start adopting the new language, because it will be a bit weird to have parts defined in Go, parts then patched after the CRD is generated. So and I guess this will be still in some tech preview once it lands in 1.23. So I think we have the liberty of waiting a bit until the feature stabilizes.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to bring the topic so that you have awareness that that is coming and that might solve a bit of the problem.
Yep, definitely. And yeah, I mean, the operator is by no way different from the other operators. So yeah, everybody faced the same issue that you can validate some things with OpenAPI, but not everything right now.
Okay, I think we have everything for this topic. Let's go to the next one. Also, Simon, can you start?
Yeah, that's something. So something that popped up from a review. Like, so someone is wants. I mean, not someone. Many people want to support a global alert manager config custom resource for managing the alert manager. So we've got finally someone looking at it, and something I realize is, so the idea is to, in the alert manager CAD, to have a reference to a single alert manager config resource. So we would reference that by name. Now the question is, okay, but we want to mark that as experimental because the alert manager config custom resource is by definition alpha, V1 alpha 1. So now comes the question that, okay, in a V1 CRD, we are going to use something which is experimental. So we need to flag that, but still, we all know that users will try to use it, and then they will read after the fact that this was experimental, and so on. So one question, and I'm not sure if the topic was already discussed, but we have no feature flag right now in the operator. Whenever we add a new field to a stable CRE, then that gets available to everybody. For some of them, we say, oh, it's experimental, use it at your own risk. It might be better to say, by default, we don't enable such fields. So the operator will do nothing. The field exists in the CRE, in the custom resource definition. But when you start the operator without any feature flag enabled, then all the experimental fields would be ineffective, basically. So you have to consciously turn on the flag to say, I want to use the new capability of defining my alert manager configuration with the alert manager config CR. So I was just wondering what people think about it. I'm not asking to add feature flags for things that are already experimental and that which are flagged as such, but more for new things that we may add in the future. Then maybe we can use that pattern.
I think there was some discussion upstream in Kubernetes about having experimental fields for CRDs, which is kind of what you are describing here. So maybe we should just research that, search for that discussion again and use that pattern, as this was something that is kind of blessed by the community.
If that exists, then that's fine. Still, and there might be also like not only changes to the CRE that might warrant a feature flag. Let's say that we realize that a particular implementation for, like, say that we want to change, I don't know, the default value for the readiness probe because we realize that the value we put is not adequate. Then maybe we want to have a way to change that behavior and have people try it with a new value, enabling a feature flag, and then as a way to move slowly the implementation from one default to another, stuff like that.
I would like to say that we kind of have two different things here. The first is the API and the stability of the API, and second is the runtime operation of the operator itself. And as far as API goes, we already have a mechanism. We can just bump the CRD version if we break compatibility. So we can put things where it's in alpha and break compatibility when we decide that this pattern was not working. This is what alpha is for. And at least for alert manager config, we are still testing things out. It's not guaranteed to be stable as the API goes. And as for the runtime parameters, right now I don't really see the need for that, but we can discuss in issues when that comes actually. Because from what I see, the main point is the API and fields for the API. Am I correct?
Not only. So I don't have a particular example in mind about things that would where a feature flag would be useful to change the behavior of the operator, but I think that may happen. I mean, I can research and look at past examples of things that we change under the hood that might have triggered like problems eventually for our users. So I think in most,
I wonder.
yeah. Go ahead.
I wonder how you would measure like though that if that was effective or not. Like I mean, you would expect users to either turn the flag on or off and report back to us. But at some point we're going to have to turn it off, and we don't know who has used it, or we have no way of measuring that, right?
Yeah, that's all open for discussion. Like my point was more to say, is there like a consensus or a rejection of us having a way to define feature flags in general? So Prometheus recently does it a lot, and I think that that's something we should consider when that makes sense, obviously, but that it might be useful. Whenever we feel like a change is controversial or might need, I mean, we are not really sure whether that's the right approach or not, and we want people to try it, then I think that could be a viable option to say, let's have it behind a feature flag so that people can test it and report whether that worked for them.
Yeah, so I think the example or your link in the agenda, as to Pavel's point, I think we are actually adding a field there to a V1 API. So essentially we are adding something that we're saying the API is stable, but we're adding something that we don't know exactly, is it going to remain in place or is it going to change? So, we're kind of breaking our guarantees there slightly, I suppose. And I suppose this will be one way of working around that, right? Because as per the linked issue, we need something in addition to the V1 API. And we have no way of testing it out other than basically rolling with it, right?
Yeah.
So
again,
it's a challenge. We can't step back and say, okay, this is, we have a stable API, but we need to make an addition to that. So is there any way we can mark that particular addition as alpha almost,
Yeah, that would be basically a way to say this particular field is alpha and may change in the future because that's behind the feature flag. But yeah, Philip and then Damien.
My only concern is that we will get some sort of a disparity between the API and the behavior. So for example, you don't enable the feature flag, but you set the field. And even though we've documented this behavior, people might not actually read the correct documentation. Maybe one way to solve this is with an admission webhook. So the validating webhook would verify that if you want to use this specific field, then it needs to explicitly be enabled as a feature. So maybe that's one way to solve it. But that's the only concern I had with because one thing is to add a feature flag to a process, and then another thing is to add a feature flag to an API. And I think those two need to at least remain in lockstep and be toggled at the same time on and off.
Yeah, Damien, go ahead. Probably.
Yeah, I was going to say that I have the same concerns as Philip. Basically, the issue that you are describing is that the API, there is no, the API itself is not tied to any Prometheus Operator version, so we have to stay compatible with the API no matter what. And it's way harder to actually deprecate field and change the API rather than just change the operator itself. So what we could do is just have the feature, like have some kind of feature gates in the Prometheus operator that would allow us to maybe like apply some experimental configuration, and then the operator would be the one responsible for like injecting the field in Prometheus or any component, so that we don't break the API and we can actually like tweak the options that can be given to Prometheus operator as much as we want. We can duplicate feature gates. We can add new feature gates as much as we want, because like they will be bound to particular version of the Prometheus operator. Whereas if we try to change the API, it's way harder to actually like enable things and disable things. We have less margin of error there. Yeah, go ahead, Pavel. I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to the API, the operator needs to handle all the API options, regardless of feature gates or anything, because otherwise we will have a lot of problems, and it's quite complicated. We are going into quite complicated setup where we have feature gate for the API, which is versioned, and feature gate for particular operations of the operator itself. And for me, if we want to go with the feature, with like enable feature, that means it is tied not to the API, but the particular things that this is doing, like the operator is doing. So one example would be we are hard coding the upgrade strategy for Prometheus stateful set, which is kind of currently, I think, in parallel or ordered. I don't remember. However,
parallel.
Yeah. So the feature for me here and enablement of the feature flag would be to change that behavior. It is not tied to the API itself, because API is the same for both. However, we are changing the behavior for the operator of how it handles the API. And for that, I agree that feature flags would be kind of something that we would need to have to test such setups and to enable users to use a different way. But I don't really see how like having a feature flag to a thing that is tied for the API itself would work and have a good user experience. Because then, as Philip said, we would need to enable both at the same time. We would need to have an API that has a field, and then we would need to have an operator with enabled a feature flag to handle that field.
So to go back to your first example, that's definitely something like that's a good example. Another one is something that we discussed with Philip too, is like say that we want the Prometheus operator to deploy, let's say, pod disruption budget, for instance, coming with the Prometheus stateful set, let's say. So it would configure everything. That's kind of a major change. And maybe people want to configure their pod, keep configuring their pod disruption budget themselves. But maybe we can hide that behind the feature flag. And so you would start the operator saying, okay, just configure highly available Prometheus setup for me with everything that you know should be there. And regarding the API, my point, or the CRDs, my point was to say the field would always exist in their CRD, but then if you don't have the feature flag being enabled, then the Prometheus operator will just not consider the field. Not in the case of the alert manager config, global alert manager config reference, it would just continue to use the secret and not try to look for a global alert manager config resource. And unless you have enabled the feature flag. But maybe that's not a good example for having a feature flag. I was just curious whether that's something that we would consider in general. But again, maybe the example of the global alert manager config is not enough, or is not relevant enough.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this particular example, but just wanted to talk about the one that you said about the PDBs. I think the approach that you suggested was the same that we used for CRDs at the time when the operator was still responsible for creating them. There was basically a feature flag that we could enable or disable to tell the operator to whether like create the CRD itself or not. And I think for this particular feature flag, we only like set a deprecation timeline of like 2 releases or maybe a bit more, since it was used for a long time, but it wasn't that big. So that's completely feasible in the case of PDBs, in my opinion.
Yeah, the generation of the CRDs, would be a good example. Could have both leave at the same time, like automatically insert the CRD and have a flag that would not insert the CRD, and then we would try basically from our selfish Redact point of view, we could have tried that in OpenShift until we say, okay, now we have fleshed out everything, we know how we can make it work, and so we can push it back to the upstream.
Should we maybe just focus on this specific use case that you brought up? So the use case is the alert manager resource should have a reference to an alert manager config. And the concern is that the alert manager CRD is v1, whereas the alert manager config is v1 alpha 1. And the concern is that we might, so the question is, even if the reference exists to a v1 alpha 1, is that actually a problem? Because the field itself, because what's experimental is the alert manager config, but the alert manager config can keep, eventually it will get to v1. So
yeah. In that particular case, I agree that it's not particularly obvious. It's just that we kind of reviewing the PR, we said with Philip, okay, that needs to be flagged as, okay, you can use the alert manager config to define the global configuration, but bear in mind that this is referencing a v1 alpha 1 custom resource. So, and if you look at all the APIs or all the CRDs that we have, there are already quite a few fields where they are flagged as being experimental, and they may change in the future, even though the CRD itself is v1. So for me, in retrospect, instead of saying this field is experimental, use it at your own risk, we should probably have created a feature flag just to say, if you want to use that particular field, then just turn that on. That would be an opt-in, which is, to be honest, from what I understand, this happens also at the Kubernetes level. Like there is a new field in the stateful set that you only get, you get it. I guess the difference is that the API server is then telling you what can be injected or not. Yeah.
Bear in mind that we have experimental fields, but we never remove them from v1 APIs. So even though they are experimental, they are never removed. And we have a problem of deprecating fields, but they are still present. And the logic behind those is still present in the operator itself.
Yeah, I know. But still they are marked as experimental. So you have no guarantee on them. Even if they exist, they can't stop to do anything in the next release. Not the next one, but...
Are these fields, why were they marked as, why were they made obsolete? Were they replaced by something else?
One example of obsolete field or deprecated field that we still use is, for example, sh, shop for the image, or base image field in Prometheus CRD. There is quite a few actually handling the image itself, which are deprecated, and we didn't remove them because removal of fields from API means that we need to change the API version, because it's now breaking the API contract. So for this particular thing, with alert manager that is referencing the alpha thing. If the API stays the same, the V1 API stays the same, fields are the same, I'm fine with that as long as we can have a different operator logic for handling that. However, we need some kind of a logic for this.
I think one of the issues is that over time we tended to kind of disregard the whole CRD versioning concept. Like we just put everything that we needed into the CRD and didn't really care about its version. And like one of the issue that we are currently facing with CRDs and their versioning is that since Prometheus is changing really often, and we don't have only Prometheus, we have Alert Manager, we have other projects that introduce new fields every now and then. The CRD needs to keep up with the new features. And if we were to version them, such as what the Kubernetes API states, then we would have an issue that it would take, I don't know, like 6 releases or whatever to get a feature into the CRD. So that might be a problem as well. But I think we need to rethink how CRDs are being updated in Prometheus Operator itself.
Yeah, but when it comes to the CRD itself, we can have a conversion webhook for the CRD. So we can try like start drafting V2 and convert from V1 to V2 automatically. However, we still need to have a defined way of how we are going to deprecate things. And oh, Arthur, take care. Hug ups.
Can somebody stop the recording later?
Yeah, I can stop it if it will be still present when you go.
Okay. Sorry. See ya.
See ya.
Yeah.
Sure.
And even without a conversion webhook, I guess a mutating webhook. If we don't want to publish a new CRD, maybe a mutating webhook is going to, allow us to replace or basically transform some of the deprecated fields into the new fields or something like that.
Yeah,
We don't even need. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we want to reinvent existing mechanisms for deprecating API fields and moving to next versions. Because with adding some other logic than conversion webhook, we are essentially inventing a new way of handling things that are already figured out.
Yeah, and I was gonna say also, like, we don't necessarily need a conversion webhook. Like there are in the client itself, like when you move from one API to another, there are conversions that are in place. So even if like the object is from another API version, you will still have ways to convert it to whatever version you want. So it's pretty
This
simple if we
something
follow kind of the. Yeah.
This is something that client Go does, or?
Yeah, it generated with the CRDs, I guess, but I think you can also modify them to match your needs.
Okay.
So you can basically map like all the fields with new ones, and I think that's what was done for the Events API when they moved to core, when they moved to GA. And yeah, there are a couple of, I guess there are a couple of examples such as the events that have done that.
Okay. So yeah, just to put the idea on the table, I think the feeling is that yes, why not? But let's have a concrete example where it would make sense. Yeah, that's fine by me. And the pull request that I've linked is probably not a good example. All right.
Yeah, that one is quite complicated.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's go to the next action item. Philip, you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah, so this just came up from a conversation I had with Simon. We were talking about situations where we believe we can get into merging a bad, in this case was a alert manager config configuration to alert manager. Now, I think we have an alert for that, but I also believe we can get into a situation where if the pod restarts, that alert manager might go to start crash looping because of the bad configuration. Now I'm open to correction on that, but so the idea was just see for feedback. I don't have any thought about how we might do it or anything much, but would it be worth perhaps storing the last known valid configuration like in a secret or something? So at some point, if it got into that situation, it could just reload its last known good configuration. Now, obviously, we would hope we wouldn't get to that, given that we have alerts in place. But just as an idea, I just said I'd bring it to the table here.
Yeah, regarding that particular topic of like reusing the previous good configuration whenever like a bad configuration is introduced by a user, I usually tend to go pretty hard on like just failing when the bad configuration is in place, because the idea behind that is that I want users to be informed that their configuration is wrong as soon as possible. Because if we try to hide it with the previous configuration that was working, then they are more likely to just miss the fact that it's not the configuration that they want that is in place. Whereas like if we just throw an error, and even though that might lead to some unavailability or anything, at the end of the day, like they will know that the configuration is wrong because like it's not working, and they will be able to patch whatever they want.
Sure, I agree with you mostly, but I think that the way Alert Manager currently works itself is that it doesn't do that. It actually does. So you could in Kubernetes you can create or via the operator you can create bad configuration, and Alert Manager will not actually run the configuration that you think it's running. So it will go back to the last known source, good source. Now Simon can probably correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's my understanding at least. And I think we have, as I said, I think we have an alert to say that the config can't be reloaded. And then maybe it's just kind of a continuation of that behavior as opposed to crashing with an alert saying we've started with bad configuration or something along those lines. But obviously, I know there's downsides to that too, which you've just talked about. So, but it's more of a case of trying to replicate what Alert Manager was currently doing.
Yeah, just to be more precise, definitely the Alert Manager has a way to kind of not commit a configuration that is invalid. So it will validate the configuration. If it detects that something is wrong in the YAML file, then it will just keep the current configuration and an alert will fire. Now the issue is that if by accident you roll out a new version of the pod, or you just kill the pod and it gets deployed somewhere else, then it will have no idea about what was the previous valid configuration. We'll try to load the one that is invalid. And we all know that the operator itself, as much as we can, we validate the configuration and we make sure that it can be loaded by the Alert Manager. And the same is true for Prometheus, but there are definitely cases where you can have users providing a service monitor or Prometheus rule that will trigger like an error when loading the configuration by Prometheus or Alert Manager. So how do we make sure that if that happens, and we know that the Prometheus or Alert Manager will at least use the last known valid config, even if the pod restarts?
Yeah, so as for me, let's circle back and look what actually mechanism we have currently in place to handling that. First of all, from user side, we have validation webhook. We can validate the configuration and say that, hey, this is wrong. If this passes, and we apply that configuration, and alert manager decides that no, this is not a correct configuration for me right now, we have an alert that will be firing that this particular configuration is not okay. And if user, even after the time, if user rolls out new alert manager and rolls the pod, let's start with one pod. We will have still the alert, right? Some kind of an alert. But let's circle to that, because we will have a pod that is not actually running, because it doesn't have a configuration. So the pod will be crash looping. We have another alert, and with this is assuming one pod for alert manager, not all three. And if we have all three alert manager pods rolled and they are not working right now, we don't have a way to send alert anywhere. However, our recommendation is to use the watchdog alert, which should be firing and saying you, hey, your monitoring stack is down. So we have 4 measures to counteract this without even storing previously known configuration. Do we want 5th?
That's true.
Yeah.
I suppose if that does happen, maybe we have a bug in our validating webhook as well, that we haven't verified something. We could look at it like that, I suppose. But yeah, point taken.
Yeah. Still, I think that in environments where people or the person managing the Prometheus or the alert manager like delegates the configuration via service monitors or alert manager config to the cluster users, then that situation will happen more often than we like.
And I don't think it's only about the situation happening. Like if I put myself in the shoes of someone that's managing alert manager and is allowing users to create basically routing rules with an alert manager config, and if I have 50 or 100 different teams or stakeholders or individuals, and one of them creates configuration that crashes alert manager, how do I figure out which one is the faulty one? And what do I do in that situation?
Yeah, and right now I think that's what it stemmed from, because I don't think we have a way to identify, as Simon was working through the enhancement, I don't think we have a way to identify which user provided config has actually caused the crash. So that was the driver for this, or that's why I started thinking about this.
Yeah, but with that, even if the user provided the config, Kubernetes, it's declarative. So you declare the config. I would assume that the config is actually running. And if that is not running, I assume there is a crash. And I don't see why in declarative environment, I would need a second mechanism to handle something like this. I just don't see how this mixes up. I understand what you are saying, but this is problematic to debug and to diagnose, but we have a status field. Maybe we should focus on actually having a status for the particular config that broke everything.
That's going to be a hard problem, because by definition, the starting point is that nothing has caught the issue before. Like even if you had the validating webhook, then the validating webhook let the bad config happen. So now how you trace back the invalid resource that made your alert manager or Prometheus crash is definitely a hard problem for me.
Yeah, so we can validate each alert manager config individually, but I think it's as we merge those and push that config out to alert manager, is trying to identify which of the, say we had 100 of them, for example, which of those caused the issue, or is it some arbitrary combination of different configs that suddenly has caused an issue, as opposed to an invalid standalone config. That's just where it's coming from.
So is its etcd having a historical configs, historical objects in its database? Because if it has, we can use that mechanism. We can hash our config, compare different objects, and use this. But I'm just shooting right now. ADS.
No, I mean the other problem is how do we know that a configuration is invalid? The operator will have to communicate with the alert manager as well, because we even if we do have this last known configuration, how do you know when to actually use it?
On that topic, we still want to have the line of communication between operator and the operand. That is one of the issues behind the .status field. That's why I brought it up here, because you still want to have the communication to reflect the status of your operand in the Kubernetes native way, which means that with that, we can have a way to differentiate what is the correct way and if we are using the latest correct configuration. Artur, go.
Sorry, I just got back. I'm probably missing context. But doesn't the Prometheus operator do not reload a bad config? So why starting a previous one?
Because it reloads the bad config.
No, yeah, you're totally right, Artur. Now imagine that you roll out new version of the pods and the last config was invalid. Then your alert manager pod or your Prometheus pod would be crashing now, just because the last valid config was only in memory.
In theory, it's only the first new pod should be crashing, unless something crashes the old pods as well. So it's a lot of things.
No, all will be crashing because our update strategy is parallel and not ordered ready.
Yeah, it depends if you have pod disruption budgets and so on and so on. But I mean, even if I can imagine you put all the protections in place, there will still be cases where no matter what, you end up in a situation where all your alert manager pods or Prometheus pods are crashing because...
So should the behavior then the operator should observe the alert manager instance and potentially in the future the Prometheus as well? And if we detect that the current configuration is invalid, we should try the previous configuration. And if that is also invalid for any reason, because it could happen, like imagine someone deploys an invalid configuration and then deploys an invalid configuration again. And now you have the last configuration, which is also invalid.
Well, it would have to be the last working configuration. Yeah, but the way I was thinking about it, just without going too deep into it, was that maybe we would delegate to the config reloader, and as it tried to reload, if it sees error, go back and read the secret from disk or whatever, and try and reload that. And then we could have some alert saying alert manager config outdated or out of sync or something like that. Just again, like I just brought it here to the table to get some feedback as to whether the whole thing was a good idea before actually putting too much more thought into it.
Just to wrap it up, from my side, I would be against having something that is using the old config because it's not declarative at that point. And since we have 4 measures to counteract already in place, I would be for allowing users for better debugging ways how to spot that situation, not to prevent that, because we have already a lot of mechanism to prevent it and notify it. But we can discuss in issues and maybe some design document about that.
Yep, sounds good.
The last topic I'll move to Slack.
Okay, and everyone have a nice rest of the day and have a nice holidays probably.
Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.